As you may have seen from the announcement, gentlemen, the 5th Fest banner is about to arrive soon. There are 4 featured students available. To be fair, none of them are not that easily skippable. All 4 Fest banner units are undoubtedly must-have characters, and you should obtain all of them if possible. For those who do not know what a Fest banner is, it is a special banner where the SSR rate is doubled, making SSR characters significantly easier to obtain compared to regular banners. However, obtaining the featured student is still very difficult, as the featured rate remains the same as other banners at only 0.7%. Since the overall SSR rate is 6%, this means that even if you pull an SSR, there is still less than a 10% chance for it to be the featured student. Unless you plan to obtain them through the Spark exchange, consider yourself extremely lucky if you manage to get both, or even all of the featured Fest students within one Spark, or without needing to Spark at all. And cope even harder if you are waiting for better students to appear here. Moreover, Wakamo, Hoshino, and Mika do not appear on this banner, as they have been moved to the Recollection archived banner held previously. So, if you are hoping to get them here, unfortunately, you cannot. First is Kei. Kei is a mystic supporter with a newly introduced composite armor type, represented by a dark green color, if you can hear a color. Her abilities are genuinely incredible. Her X skill increases piercing effectiveness for all allies within range while also boosting their attack. Not only that, but her sub skill also increases critical rate for allies inside the area whenever the X skill is active, which honestly helps reduce the amount of malding required, though unfortunately, it does not completely free you from torment-induced mauled suffering. Her basic skill itself does not do much besides dealing accumulated damage based on allies inside the buff area. It is not particularly noticeable most of the time, but technically speaking, it still helps. The basic skill will automatically activate whenever the duration of her area buff ends. This means that if you cast her X skill again while another buff zone is still active, the previous area will immediately disappear and be replaced with a newer one, triggering the basic skill in the process. Technically, yes, you can spam her basic skill damage this way. Would I recommend it? Absolutely not, because it required accumulated damage first to make it deal more powerful damage. Now, Kei functions similarly to Year Kayoko, except she is essentially an upgraded version. The best part is that Kei's buffs are aura type buffs, meaning they can stack together with other non-aura buffers. For example, you can comfortably use Kei together with Year Kayoko, Kotama or Himari or Sea Hare in the same formation because their buff types differ. Though realistically speaking, not many situations actually require double mystic effectiveness buffs outside of Fury of Set. For some reason, attack buffs, crit damage buffs, and X skill damage buffs usually end up being more valuable instead of stacking another mystic effectiveness buff. Now, perhaps you are wondering what exactly an aura type buff even means. Essentially, students must remain inside the buff area to continue receiving the effect. Once they leave the area, they immediately lose the buffs. As far as I understand, there are generally 3 buff categories: self buffs, direct ally applied buffs, aura buffs. So even if 2 buffs are technically the same type, such as attack buffs, they will still stack as long as their application category differs. That is probably the simplest explanation possible. Overall, Kei is essentially the upgraded version of Year Kayoko, providing mystic effectiveness, attack, and critical rate buffs through an aura type skill that stacks with most other supports, except identical aura type buffs. Additionally, her X skill cost is incredibly cheap, at only 2 cost. Sure, her duration is shorter than Year Kayoko's, but her composite armor makes her significantly more reliable against bosses, instead of immediately evaporating like Year Kayoko sometimes does. However, from my own experience, Kei does suffer from having rather terrible max HP, so you will probably experience moments where she dies more often than expected. Thankfully, UE40 fixes that issue fairly well by increasing her max HP. But hey, even if she dies frequently, at least she does not instantly explode the moment a boss breathes in her direction like Year Kayoko. And that is Kei. Now, let us move to the other banner, Arisu Armed, or Battle Arisu, depending on whichever naming preference satisfies your soul. She is an absolutely absurd mystic DPS that Nexon somehow kept hidden from us for so long. She also uses composite armor, just like Kei, or Kei just like Arisu. Her X skill may initially sound somewhat confusing, so let me simplify it. You may target either enemies or herself. If targeted on enemies, it simply deals damage. If targeted on herself, however, it charges her X skill. The charges amplify the damage of her future X skill casts. 1 charge doubles the damage, 2 charges, which is the maximum, triples the damage. Effectively speaking, this is equivalent to casting 2 or 3 X skills at once. Now yes, the cost becomes extremely high. To fully maximize her damage with 2 charges requires 12 X skill cost. While she does require malding because her X skills are not guaranteed critical hits, if every hit from her fully charged X skill crits, she actually outdamages Mika performing 3 X skills under identical buffs against the same target. Or perhaps I am missing something here. But overall, Arisu completely melts nearly every mystic boss currently available. Combined with K buffs, and supports like Nagisha X skill cost low nor Yuzu for cost reduction. She forms one of the strongest possible lineups against mystic raids. Furthermore, her sub-skill converts all of her attacks into X skill damage, including her basic skill. Which means her basic skill can also benefit from X skill damage amplification from Kizuki or Seiya, whom many of you definitely gooned over. So yes, Arisu is currently one of the best mystic DPS students available, and should absolutely be prioritized if your goal is deleting mystic bosses from existence. The main exceptions are Pirorodzilla, Kurokage GA, and Fury of Set. Against Pirorodzilla and Kurokage, higher difficulties introduce significant defensive scaling, which heavily reduces her damage output. That is precisely where a Hoshino becomes relevant. Meanwhile, Fury of Set possesses passive X skill damage reduction, meaning Arisu's attacks become less effective since most of her damage counts as X skill damage. And conveniently enough, Shiroko Terror's banner exists specifically for that situation. Now then, let us discuss builds. For Kei, the majority of builds recommend fully maximizing everything and raising her to UE40. I suppose people simply really love cute tsundere wafers.
Damn, she's literally my wife. Time to pull.
As for our beloved Dali princess daughter, Arisu also wants everything fully maximized, with UE60 being ideal for maximum damage output. If that sounds too expensive for you, stopping at UE40 is perfectly fine, and more than enough for Torment or lower raid difficulties. Sure, she requires melding, but honestly, that is not a flaw. That is merely a hidden feature designed to let her outdamage Mika. But I think many people are completely missing the most important part about Arisu. Sure, you can't clearly see it in game, and require hyperpixelate zoom, but this part, you can almost feel how soft and warm it looks. Anyway, that's all for these 2 fest banners, and yes, every available fest unit here is undeniably powerful, as they are specifically designed to excel in raids. Aris can melt virtually any mystic boss, while Kei provides incredible support for mystic attackers. A Hoshino can shred Pirorodzilla, because she completely ignores 85% of the boss's defense. Meanwhile, Shiroko Terror is highly useful for Goz Lunatic, Fury of Set, and the newly added boss, Drumbarka. You will most likely need Shiroko Terror for insane difficulty and above, because the boss significantly reduces X skill damage during phase 2, causing most X skill damage to become heavily ineffective. However, Shiroko Terror's skill is not damage dealing. Instead, most of her damage comes from her powerful auto attacks and basic skill damage. And that should be all. As always, Godspeed.